Here, in the Castle of Demons, above the glowing waters of the Purple River, the final battle of the Endless War took place. The legions lined up in orderly ranks, ready to attack. He came to greet them solemnly for the last time. This was an opportunity to reach the Demon King sitting behind his warriors. The king parted his dry lips, lamenting that his capable opponent would lay down his head on the field of the last battle. However, Stefan was ready to accept this fight and entered the battle with a friendly smile. Golden pistols materialized in his hands. Instead of bullets, fiery magic balls came off them, striking the demons. Colliding with the ugly heads, the balls tore them apart like overripe watermelons. And Stefan also had the ability to attack from above, so that each new shot, each new spell illuminated the demons and killed them. He thought he would face fewer warriors, but since the situation was like this, he had to attack with both hands. But this did not change the fact that someone could attack from behind. Stefan looked back just in time to see a huge demon aiming right at the shooter's head. The most humane thing would be to shoot at point-blank range. The Demon King either couldn't bear it, or decided that most of his army had perished. Either way, he decided to join the fight. In his hand was a battle scythe that emitted a purple glow. The swing of this scythe created a wave like a wind, sweeping away everything in its path. The power of this attack was no less astonishing than its speed. However, Stefan was able to simply dodge, letting her pass over him. Looking at the destruction caused by this blow, the player realized that if the king hit him, he would be finished. It was impossible to dodge the next blow, and I had to push against the ground, trying to at least stay in place. As he fired back, he was already beginning to doubt his own strength. Plus, the king had another ace up his sleeve. He could shoot lasers, which was ideal for long-range combat. Moreover, the protective barrier was impenetrable. The only chance to defeat the enemy was to destroy the stone located in the center of his crown. The king didn't even look like he was trying. They were on different levels. The dark energy bolts rushed towards Stefan. He barely managed to dodge them. However, one of the balls still caught the shooter. The Demon King looked at him with disdain, not even moving from his throne. He was sure that the enemy would not be able to even scratch him. However, Stefan didn't think so. The bullet that came out of his new weapon looked like a furious eye. And that bullet was exactly what was able to break through the Demon King's barrier. This angered him, and another attack was not long in coming. Ribbons of black material slid out of the ground and entangled the player's legs. So what? It was still a great opportunity to shoot again. One after another, the bullets rushed towards the barrier right where the stone was. It was time to finish with the demons. It seemed that these shots only angered the king even more. But this interruption gave Stefan the opportunity to grab his favorite pistols again. A decisive jerk, and the barrel rested against the weakened point of the barrier. It was fun, but it was time to end. The last shot ended this game. The player was satisfied. The game is not bad. The magic skill surprisingly helped the shooter a lot in passing it. Why not take full advantage of this in the third version of the game? However, if the hero was just a mage, it would be boring. The game offered a special karma system for its special character. In exchange for bonuses, such as the most outstanding abilities in magic possible, he will receive penalties: insomnia, headaches, drug addiction, a weak body. In this scenario, the character will be completely sick, but who cares? It's just a character. However, life constantly throws up new twists of fate. It seems that just a character will not remain just that. Being sucked into the screen was the last thing he remembered from his past life. In his new life, he was immediately met with a blow to the face. The player's head jerked to the side. So ironically, he became his weakest character, the one he had bullied so much. It turned out that this character was called Rainok. First of all, they expected him to be ready to jump up right now and rush to his workplace. The other workers were already completely ready and mockingly discussed the stupid fool who had decided to sleep until the boss arrived. When everyone, urged on by the management, moved towards the workshop, the supervisor Brooke stopped Van. He asked if he had gotten what he was asked for. The place he ended up in was a factory. They fed him poorly and made him work around the clock. Other workers refused to answer questions, intimidated by their superiors. But many did not want to talk, because they had already written him off as a corpse. Indeed, with such health, Rainok would not have lasted there even a month. His throat was torn by a cough. His weak body refused to work as his superiors demanded. Instead of help, he got another kick. Brooke told Van to do something so that this worthless thing would at least not die in front of him. The only good thing was that such health had to be the price for the incomparable skills embedded in the character. It was good that he was ignored. Having found out the information and using magic, he could have quietly escaped. When Raynok stepped out into the corridor, he saw light shining through the crack. Through the crack, one could see people smoking in the courtyard and discussing the slow new workers and deliveries to some union. Besides, they mentioned some black magician, which means there really was magic in this world. One of them had something in his hand that looked like an electronic cigarette. It was a viper, which enhances a person's physical qualities. It had side effects, but the main thing was that it had mana. At the sound of this word, it was as if an electric current passed through Raynok's body. His alter ego. He never thought something like this was possible. Mana. The magic of this world, something that held the universe together, something that filled it up. At night, Renoka's bed glowed like a weak bluish nightlight. The union members will arrive in 2 days. With his mana level, considering everyone will be busy, he should be able to escape. Testing his theory, Raynok placed a ball of light on his forehead. It worked. It raised his temperature, and now he must have looked like he was on the verge of death. Would they let him stay in bed alone? That same night, Van brought Brooke the vipers he had asked him to get earlier. In gratitude for a task well completed, the overseer even gave one of them to the worker. He had another matter to attend to. The union members could not be shown the half-dead Raynok. It was necessary to make sure that he was not seen by anyone. Ever. On the day when important visitors were expected, everyone stood up again at the sound of the siren. Everyone except Raynok, who looked like he had only survived by some miracle. The other workers couldn't decide what to do with him and who would carry the corpse. Their conversations were interrupted by Wang. He will sort it out himself. As others said, he will do everything cleanly. A strong hand grabbed Raynok by the shoulder, simultaneously waking him up and turning him onto his back. However, instead of hitting him, Wang handed him the viper. Then he threw over his shoulder that this should be enough for today and left. Raynok realized that he would not be left alone in the room and decided to use the gift. Now the energy in him was overflowing. That guy, he has some business with the warden, right? In any case, the escape plan changes a little. The loading dock was teeming with people hauling boxes. The man in the suit advised reducing the workload on workers because the current situation could alarm the Workers' Rights Commission. Although the man from the factory shouldn't have been too offended by this, he still bowed, apologizing for the situation. Meanwhile, Raynok approached another employee sitting at the table. He asked to open the director's office, claiming that his business concerned vipers. Irritated, the employee nevertheless took the keys and ordered me to follow him. The whole way, he angrily shouted and grumbled, not understanding who had the idea to hand the box over to Renoku, and most importantly, why now? As soon as the man opened the door, the player turned to magic, ready to attack. He grabbed the employee by the throat, sending a stream of lightning through his body. Amazing. He actually succeeded. He killed a man. Raynok picked up the keys from the floor. Perhaps they would fit the car? Whitish foam was coming out of the dead employee's mouth, creating a foul stench. But the young man still remained in the office to search him. A silver pistol was found in one of the boxes. He took a large jacket and another viper for himself. After all, these things were simply incredible. Suddenly, he was interrupted. Someone's footsteps were heard outside the door. The warden came up to the door from the other side and started cursing, not even knowing at whom. They had so much to do, and there was someone out there chilling with a viper? However, when he opened the door, he came across not a slacker, but the corpse of a colleague. And this man, too, perhaps, deserved to be struck by lightning, since such an opportunity arose. However, he turned out to be faster than his predecessor and managed to step aside. And Raynok no longer has the strength for a new discharge. What to do? Once Brooke realized who had just nearly taken his life, the fear disappeared. He swung his weapon, intending to put the boy in his place. However, the boy had a gun, which he resolutely pointed at his opponent. Brooke immediately stopped and raised his hands. Raynok cast a silent spell so that no one would hear the shot. While the warden babbled that they could agree on everything right now, he thought about what to do next. Brooke, meanwhile, promised not to tell anyone anything, just so he could leave alive. Here they were distracted. Someone appeared behind the door again. The warden pointed to another exit, suggesting that Raynok leave right now and let him go. However, Brooke could not be let go. But could he kill a man? Another employee walked down the corridor, cursing the slackers who were dumping even more work on him. However, what he found behind the door was not a comrade chilling out, but something much more unpleasant. Meanwhile, Raynok was racing towards the exit in a stolen car. He pointed a gun at the guard, demanding that he open the gate. He obeyed without question, anything to keep him alive. Then the radio lying to the side came to life. This employee, who discovered two corpses, one of which belonged to a supervisor, transmitted a message to all posts that a killer was walking around the factory and that all exits needed to be closed immediately. The guard thought quickly. He immediately turned off the radio, thinking that this would increase his chances of survival. However, it will definitely become a problem. The bullet passed through, shattered the glass wall, and splattered the booth with blood. High spiritual strength and intelligence overcame the fear of killing and gave the opportunity to escape by smashing the barrier with the body of an expensive car. In the city, some people were surrounded by equally tense situations. For example, one of them was running from the police. It seemed like he didn't have long to run. Right opposite was a mirrored window. He didn't stop. The man literally jumped out of the building, breaking through the glass with his body. The police peered over the edge. Although there was no body in sight, it was obvious that no one would survive a jump from such a height. They removed a piece of bloody cloth from the sharp shard and went down to find what was left of the man. So it was a magically and technologically advanced city of the Balkans. This world was different from the one in the second version of the game. First of all, everything there was imbued with magic. The magical energy was everywhere, and it was similar to what he felt in the factory. Maybe he shouldn't have run away? Renok found a hotel he could afford and stayed there. Yes, he had vipers, but they were limited, so he just needed to rest. I had to drive around the city for an hour, trying to get away from the tail, and then abandon the car. Now he could allow himself to rest. More precisely, allow himself to lose consciousness right in the corridor. When Renok woke up, he felt terribly thirsty. Luckily, there was bottled water in the room's refrigerator. However, this water did not stay in him for long. As soon as something got into his body, he immediately turned inside out. My head was hurting. My muscles were torn apart. My hands were shaking. So this is what a side effect of a viper looks like? But there was no choice yet. Only they could support this weak body. He didn't want to think about it. He wanted to eat. The last time he had something in his mouth was about 12 hours ago. There was only canned food in the room. The internal telephone received a call. It was the administration reminding that there were 2 hours left to pay. After paying the required amount, 220 cells, he would have only 10 left. The money would not be enough even for one more day of living, and there was nowhere to go. In any case, it was necessary to tidy himself up before going out. First of all, Renok cut off the hair sticking out in all directions. I wonder if anyone he knew would recognize him. Sitting on the street, he tried to explore his surroundings for bandits who might have money. Without even an ID, Renok could not count on official earnings. Yes, he heard a conversation about some money that someone was supposed to bring. That was good news. The bad news was that as soon as he stood up, pain shot through his head. Only Viper could help. In the gateway, 2 people were beating a man. He claimed that he had been robbed of money he owed. And although he got a lot of pokes and blows, the bandits quickly realized that they wouldn't get anything this way. It would be a different matter to saw the man up and sell him for parts. Salvation came from an unexpected direction. Suddenly, both bandits found themselves enveloped in discharges of blue lightning. The young man in gray was searching the corpses, and the rescued man was shaking with horror. Of course, it was Renok who was able to get 700,000 cell. He also found a laser cutter, modified into a weapon, which had almost dismembered a man a minute ago. The man looked pathetic enough that he didn't need to be killed. If only he would fulfill one request, and he did it. Renok got information about where he could make good money, having only his magic in hand. He got to the place he was advised to go to. He changed his clothes and even changed his face with magic. He couldn't reveal his identity so easily. At the bar, he was met by a gray-haired man who poured whiskey into a glass. It was to him that the player decided to turn with the question of whether a magician could get a job here. Just at that moment, a long-haired girl came out from behind the staff door. Her name was Jenny, and she believed that a mage would always be useful around the house. Renok introduced himself as Van. However, it was impossible to just hire a person. It was necessary to at least tell what he could do. Renok interrupted her by creating an impressive ball of lightning from the tip of his finger. Electricity, a very rare magic. And he even created such a complex spell without a magic circle. She immediately got a contract out of nowhere. Such talent couldn't be missed. Renoku was immediately offered a job as a hunter, which suited him because he was ready for anything except deception. He was supposed to catch a janitor who escaped after trying to steal Achilles' security equipment. 3 million cell were paid for this. All that was needed was a little blood of the wanted person. Jenny advised against turning to blood mages. They took too much. But he didn't need outside help. He could use his old skills. Renak cast the blood chase spell. Tiny spots of blood turned into a scarlet snake that flowed through the city streets. The same man who had jumped out of the window some time ago was her target. Turning around, he saw the magician in a red haze. Damn, how did they find him? And the man started running. Renak came to him fully prepared for battle, but now he was unsure of the effectiveness of his ranged attacks. The sound wave should have worked. She immediately hit the fugitive in the back, causing him to fall. In addition, blood started coming out of his ears. Renak approached him, but suddenly the pathos of the moment was broken by a bullet hitting the protective barrier at his feet. The bullet came out of nowhere. Was it a killer? A sniper? The player was overpowering the barrier, at least for a short time, but he had to hold out, even if an anti-tank missile flew at him. The sniper had to be found, and the search wave spread out in different directions. There was no one within a kilometer radius, which means that either the shooter was further away or used good camouflage. But if you think about it, judging by the place where the bullet hit, they weren't shooting at him but at a man whom he would have killed anyway. Okay, it's none of his business, but the mission had to be completed. A shot rang out. 3 million cell were almost in his pocket. The image of Hunter Wang must not be allowed to be destroyed. People must know him as cold-blooded and cruel, know and fear him. The shooter, who had been watching through the scope the entire time, suddenly felt a chill run down his back. It was Renak who looked him, it seemed, straight in the eyes. Did he really figure out the sniper that quickly? He wasn't that far away. He had to seize the moment, so the player gathered lightning in his hand. This was the magic he could use even with his eyes closed. It was clearly visible through the sight, although the shooter did not understand until the very end why this was happening. But when lightning flashed from the sky, he understood everything. When Renak reached the desired roof, all that remained of it and the entire high-rise building was a smoking skeleton. This was magic on a whole new level. The player decided that the sniper had escaped, but there was no point in pursuing him. First, the bag with the corpse entered the bar, and then the hunter himself. There he was met by a bartender who advised him not to scare away the customers. While opening the body, the man said that next time he should enter through the back door. He deftly examined the body and correctly concluded that the cause of death was a gunshot wound. Renak was to receive 2,700,000 cells, excluding commission, unless he chose an unconventional way to transfer his earnings. The options included bonds, shares, and fictitious bank accounts. Some people needed exactly these paths. Jenny joined them again and praised them for their efficiency. Renak simply said that he was lucky. But she recognized the young magician's talent and wanted to continue working with him. Listening to the girl, Van decided that she, at the very least, did not trust him. She smiled. Trust had to be earned. But it seemed there was something else, some more serious reasons. Renak left, and Jenny received a tablet with CCTV footage from the bartender, giving her a chance to see the hunter's impressive work. Van decided not to return to his room, but to go to the Balkan library to learn about the magical system of this world. Maybe he will get information about time magic or higher magic, or maybe he will find a way to maintain life in a weak body. But in the very first book, he found something else. It turns out that each mage's mana had a structure, and to find it out, you had to pour a little mana into your palm. It actually worked. Moreover, Renak could change the pattern of his mana, which was only available to level 8 archmages. I wonder how much higher his level is. Is there anyone who is stronger than archmages? By the evening, the player's ideas about magic had completely changed. In the second version of the game, there were two types of magic. A stronger, unique one and a weaker, but giving a wide range of actions, general one. There was no unique magic here. But how could Renak use it then? Suddenly, someone called out to the young man. Had he already decided to give up? It was a fair-haired beauty who, for some reason, was interested in the young man surrounded by books. Without looking at him, she said sympathetically that sitting over books would not do any good. If he wanted to become a magician, he should have started doing it in school, and now his hope was useless. In this area, talent and luck play a bigger role than effort. But she shouldn't have pestered a stranger. She shouldn't have been disturbed. The girl advised her to put the books away and leave, but instead, Renak threw a question at her back asking if she knew this from her own experience. If she's a student, she shouldn't give up so easily. Hearing this, the girl handed Renoku her business card. He's strange, but curious. Why not contact him? Next time we meet, she'll definitely show us some magic. Looking at the card, Van realized that this was not a talentless student, but a teacher at a magic university. But why did she need him? And yet she is so young. She looks even younger than him, although he himself looks as if he is on the verge of death. Perhaps he should at least buy some normal food. At the market, he encountered a policeman reading the mana of a young man. This caused concern. What if they decided to test his mana as well? Suddenly, a saleswoman called out to the player. She asked if he was doing something illegal if he was looking at the law enforcement officers with such concern. Raynok thought that mana in this world was something like a fingerprint, and checking it shouldn't frighten or surprise anyone. Anyway, he came for vegetables. It turned out that this girl owned a shop and growing vegetables was her hobby. She handed over an onion that helped with insomnia, and of course with those circles under her eyes. While collecting food, the girl said that he had unique mana. What is such a magician doing in a simple market? Interrupting Renok's feverish thoughts, the girl handed him the package, as if she hadn't demonstrated amazing mana-reading abilities a minute ago. After that, at the hotel, Renok devoted a lot of time to studying magic. He never found the key to the unique magic. In addition, his health was getting worse. The player was dependent on medication. The next time he came to the bar, Van asked Jenny for identification. She could do it, but such things are expensive. Luckily, she already had a new job offer. Although he preferred hunting, it was easier to earn large sums of money by completing assignments for companies. In the inner room, Jenny gave the mission. A large cosmetics factory, the Charlotte Corporation, was the target. The factory was producing anti-aging products that were obviously tested on humans. During the development process, people were skinned alive, and even though the case seemed solved, they had the government involved as a sponsor, meaning they could not be legally removed. The customer was another cosmetics company, Varets Corporation. There were two options: penetration and theft of data on new developments, or destruction of the plant without the possibility of restoration. The first one was actually impossible to implement, so it was actually a request to destroy the factory. It was worth agreeing, and Jenny reported unexpected information. He would be working with a partner. The door swung open and a man in a red mask appeared in the doorway. Jenny introduced him as Dylan, a mercenary known for his willingness to work for small sums. Shaking the hand of the man he instantly labeled as a moron, Renok asked why he needed a partner at all. Dylan said with a happy smile that it was Jenny who insisted, although he could have done it himself, without the help of a magician. The girl clearly did not like this. Renoka couldn't be called happy either. So they were dividing 50 million cell in half, and Jenny was supposed to get a part. But she refused her share because she had done something wrong by not telling him that they would have to work in pairs. Dylan was surprised. Van was wary. The poor partner had clearly received a scolding from her, and now that all the affairs were settled, it was possible to look at the plan of the factory. The factory was located in the 42nd district. Unlike the 50s, there was at least some infrastructure there. The place they were going to was not crowded, but there were plenty of flashlights and cameras. Dylan was clearly in the mood for a chat. He decided to discuss Jenny, who apparently really wanted to maintain a good relationship with Renoke, since she so easily gave up her percentage. The partner held out his business card. After all, Van didn't have to work in just one place. They may not have strong magicians, but they have a lot of people in good physical shape. Reaching the factory, Renok stood on Dylan's shoulders and peered over the fence. The security seemed pretty flimsy. Of course, only a madman would think of breaking in there. If Varets hadn't assigned this task, it wouldn't have been worth even looking in this direction. Having roughly understood what the enemy was like, Wong moved forward, but his partner stopped him. Was he really going to work without a mask? Asked to wear something completely ugly, Renok was first taken aback and then confidently refused. But since Dylan wasn't ready for either of them to work with their faces exposed, Van pulled the collar of his turtleneck over his face. Dylan was supposed to distract the guards while the mage got inside and did the rest. Renok decided that if anything happened, he would use this guy as cover. However, this seemingly naive fool of a partner killed the first guard before anyone even noticed him approaching. Dylan took out the second one and waved to Renoku. Impressive! Then he looked around the corner, killing the third guard with a radio. He was loud, but he clearly could have at least had security on him. Jenny certainly knew her way around people. So, here is his exit. The building was of course closed, so he was finally able to use his new cutter. Inside, Renoka was met by a guard holding a pistol in his shaking hands. This could have been dealt with using nature's dream. The guard was surrounded by a greenish haze. A minute later, he fell dead. Another minute later, purple thread stretched out to his limbs. Controlled by Renok, the body moved towards the exit. From behind the door, the screams of guards being killed could be heard. Dylan seemed to be doing an excellent job. So far, none of them knew what kind of toothy monster was waiting in the darkness. In the courtyard, the guards were actively giving up their positions. There were more of them than it seemed, but it was still unlikely that he had dealt with them all. Dylan entered the building in search of the rest. It was his mistake. His foot immediately crossed the red laser line. The mercenary found himself under the sights of a dozen red beams, and here are the remaining guards. Great! Dylan didn't have to hunt them separately anymore. Yeah, not outside, but he was probably still doing his part of the plan. Like a red lightning bolt, the mercenary slipped past each of the guards, killing them one by one. Those he didn't reach in the first go fired, and the barrage of bullets was quite impressive. Dylan attacked them with practically bare hands. The bullets seemed to fly past him. Great. Who's next in line? Meanwhile, Renok entered one of the internal work departments. Of course, in such large factories there is always a gas system. He turned the wheel with great effort, releasing the gas. It should be just enough to blow the entire building into the air. All that remains is to provide the spark. It's not hard to create a flame. You just need to contact Dylan in time and escape. Wong raised his hand, casting a spell. He combined simple spells so that the spark would only flare up after a certain amount of time had passed. Done. He has 5 minutes to find Dylan and leave. Meanwhile, the mercenary was having fun killing the remaining guards. He was distracted by something big and round that dented the wall nearby. Dylan turned around in surprise. What was distracting him? A piece of the wall suddenly flew past, almost taking off his head. In the resulting passage appeared a crocodile? Renok also heard the characteristic metallic clang, so he hurried to find out what happened. What he saw around the corner was beyond imagination. Dylan and a crocodile in a raincoat, standing on 2 legs. What the hell is this? Meanwhile, the crocodile seemed to be making small talk, asking about Andreas, for whom Dylan worked. The monster didn't even look aggressive, but his words clearly hinted that their situation was extremely unfavorable. The crocodile promised to kill Dylan quickly, but only out of respect for Andreas. Before the start, the mercenary asked to throw him his favorite bag, and the crocodile did not even refuse this request. The bag landed right behind Dylan, and he pulled out a spear that had somehow fit in there. Now the enemy won't be laughing. And what does this mean? It is not the person who chooses who will laugh here. Without listening to the end, Dylan rushed into the attack. Today, he is not having any luck at all. The counterblow sent him flying into the wall. Renok turned pale around the corner. What should he do now? There was going to be an explosion in a little over 2 minutes, and Dylan had been fighting furiously the whole time. How could he even think about escaping alone? The mercenary, meanwhile, stubbornly rose to his feet and stretched his hands behind his back. There he had blades, one of which immediately rushed towards the enemy's throat. However, the crocodile only had to wave his hand to repel this attack. Dylan tried to hit from behind. The crocodile turned and struck, then another, and then it was as if a blue wind enveloped him. It was the lightning created by Renok that condensed from the air. For Dylan, it was a small but priceless chance. He took off in a jump, planning to hit the immobilized monster with both hands at once. He didn't take one thing into account. His opponent was a crocodile with a strong tail. Dylan was thrown to the side by the blow as if he weighed nothing. The crocodile caught him and squeezed his throat. And why didn't anyone tell him about the magician? It would have been more fun with 3 of us. But since everything turned out this way, he will first deal with Dylan, and then with the magician. Hit, and right in the face. The mercenary smashed his back through the wall, flying back out onto the street. There he rolled head over heels on the ground and fell silent. Meanwhile, Renok was feverishly thinking about what to do. His lightning could melt steel, but the crocodile didn't care. Dylan was waiting for him in the yard, spread-eagled. He was alive, but he clearly couldn't get up and run right now. How could he be carried away? Wong put his hand on the weight, increasing his physical strength. Of course, he didn't want to do this because the rollback would be very unpleasant, but he had no choice. Meanwhile, the crocodile was looking for his second opponent, who could not be released alive. Suddenly, he raised his head. What was this strange feeling? And now the time allotted for escape has come to an end. The timer turned into a glowing ball, which was more than enough to set the gas-filled building on fire. There was an explosion, and the crocodile was right in the center of it. Luckily, Renok managed to cover himself and Dylan with a magical barrier. Only after coming to his senses did Van reach for the Viper. Now he absolutely could not lose his strength, and there was no other way out. Dylan shook his head in disapproval. He knows this stuff has side effects, right? Renoka didn't care too much about that right now. He was more interested in what kind of crocodile it was and how strong his partner was, since he was almost as strong as that monster. Dylan just shrugged and grabbed the mage by the scruff of the neck, reminding him that it was time to leave. He didn't just think the crocodile was still alive. He was sure of it. How could you not know Croken Acilius from Pandemonium? He was a mercenary and later became the leader of Pandemonium, a global organization of the most powerful criminals. And most importantly, he was able to lead this organization without any problems, which is unthinkable. As soon as Dylan relayed this information, the crocodile growled menacingly behind them. How did he manage to get out so quickly? His cloak wasn't even burned. There was nothing left to do but run. Croken jumped up, leaving a dent in the ground behind him. It flashed between Renoke and Dylan like a pillar of golden flame. Behind the breaking monster, a furrow was left dug in the stone. Although in this world it was possible to strengthen the body with mana, this was beyond all bounds. Dylan was clearly hurt by this triumphant appearance, lying on the ground and raising doubts that he was still alive. Okay, if I have to fight this monster, especially alone, then I need to wrap it all up as quickly as possible. Croken loomed over the puny mage. Did this little guy dare use electric magic against him? He reminded them that it was impolite to tie other people up with lightning. But was Croken human? Croken laughed, and then his clawed paw rose above Renok's head. He would kill this funny boy quickly and painlessly. Wong couldn't allow this to happen. He used gravity binding to hold the enemy in place. Purple strands enveloped Croken from all sides. Great trick. The heavier the victim, the more powerful this spell works. However, the crocodile did not think so. The threads of magic began to break. All that was left for Renok to do was cast the same spell again. Croken continued to taunt, so one of the cords was pulled across his outstretched crocodile mouth. Well, finally, he shut up. But this won't last long. The remaining mana must be used wisely. The crocodile growled and opened its mouth, breaking the spell again. Renoka was nearly blown away by the force of the destroyed magic. Croken didn't feel like laughing anymore. He was ready to tear the mage apart now. Life was at stake. Now Van was determined to release all his energy. White light was concentrated in the magician's hands. Croken didn't even wait for the next blow. He jumped up to prevent Renoku from completing the spell. He ran straight towards the white light, confident that he would not receive any damage. However, it turned out that this is not the kind of magic that can be encountered head-on. Renok pressed his hands to the ground, sending out a wave of ice that was meant to trap the monster inside. Croken found himself frozen in ice and turned into a statue while running. It looked quite impressive. It seems Renok overdid it. Even Dylan behind him was covered in snow. He stood up and advised them to run away right now because it wouldn't keep Croken away for long. Indeed, the ice has already begun to crack. Too fast. It was clear that it wouldn't help for long, but for the crocodile to cope in a couple of minutes, suddenly an idea came to Van's mind. No, they won't run away. He will be able to use ranged weapons even with a small amount of mana, as was the case in the second version of the game. This old gun might not be able to withstand the mana, but that didn't matter now. The ice shattered, revealing part of the crocodile's snout. Renok fired. The bullet flew straight into Croken's eye. But somehow this did not stop him from finally destroying the ice trap. Dylan gave him credit. He didn't think that a magician also used weapons. Renok had no strength left, but Croken was still on his feet. How is that possible? He was able to survive a bullet in his eye socket. No, he didn't just survive it, he caught it with his eyelid. Van used 4 types of magic, but he managed it with just physical strength? Croken demonstratively dropped the bullet into his paws. He said it still hurt. Dylan muttered sourly that even that was nice. Renok had no mana left. Now he could only use a laser cutter. Croken clenched his fist. Do they remember that he promised a quick death? He takes it back. At that moment, Renok thought that this is what his death looked like. Where they stood, a cloud of fire and dust rose up. However, the partners survived. Croken was held in place by a man who activated a magical shield. The crocodile clearly knew him. He called the girl the city government's Cur Evelyn. She didn't allow him to strike, throwing the enemy away from her a couple of meters. Moreover, Evelyn accused Croken of blowing up the factory. He seemed genuinely surprised and offended by this phrase. Like a child wrongly accused, he pointed at Dylan and Renoke. The girl looked at them with disbelief and said that no one would believe in Croken's desire to kill those who blew up the factory. Well, of course, it's easier for her to think that it was the head of Pandemonium who carried out the explosion. On that note, the crocodile simply turned around and walked away, astonishing the unwitting audience. Dylan bowed in gratitude, and Renok tried to comprehend how strong this girl was. Could this really be the merchant who spoke to him about mana back then? She extended her hand, helping him up. Renok stood up on his own, although his whole body was shaking. Evelyn seemed to remember it too, but then rejected the thought. The mana pattern was different. It was lucky that Wang changed his mana every time he used magic. The girl returned the mask to her face and advised them not to mess with Pandemonium if they wanted to survive. She left, and Renok sullenly informed Dylan that he would have to give up part of his fee, because if he had left the factory as planned and not organized a fight club, then none of this would have happened. The partner easily agreed to take 10 million instead of 25 million. Renok pulled out the Viper again, and again Dylan worriedly advised him to stop. Yes, he was right. Van was feeling bad, very bad. It's unclear whether it was due to mana depletion or the Viper, but he slept for 4 days. It was worth starting to eat normally, and he could now afford better medicine. But the first thing to do was to get paid. At the bar, Jenny couldn't help but joke that if he died, she would have taken the fee for herself. If only she had known that he really had almost gone to his forefathers. It turned out that Dylan came the other day to report the transfer of part of the money to his partner. The girl opened the suitcase, showing Renok more money than he had ever held in his hands. He was also given a bonus. Jenny also heard rumors about Kroken. According to her, Evelyn was a member of the government's armed unit. Under the sidelong glance of the bartender, they also discussed Pandemonium, about which almost nothing was known. Jenny advised to treat the encounter with Kroken as a natural disaster. You'd be lucky if you got away alive. The girl also handed Renok a piece of paper with an address where he could get a passport from the right people. She swore at the lack of a phone and a bank account, and she swore for good reason. Where Renok came, there were many monitors and he was greeted by a strange man in a bright shirt. But he only showed relative friendliness when the image-changing Wang revealed that he was from Jenny. The man suggested starting with payment. The banknotes more than satisfied him. Such notes, with a denomination of 1 million, were difficult even for commercial banks to obtain. After counting the money, the man began to change the information on the network. Essentially, he simply changed the name and age of a real person, creating a new identity for him, but the system was still quite fragile. It was possible to change all the information directly, but that would cost 400 million cell. Everything was completed quite quickly. All that was left was to enter a photo and name. Renok decided to take Evan. It is not clear when he will have to give up the pseudonym Van, and for life in society, he needs at least one more personality. So this was the first time the player held in his hands proof of his existence. He also got a telephone to keep in touch with Jenny. The girl advised him to get a job so that he would have at least one official source of income. The citizen's bank account shouldn't be replenished from nowhere, and he's not sure whether to continue working for Jenny. Renok did not trust her friendliness. It was safer to remain at a distance. The last time we met at the bar, he asked me to get him a Viper. The one he had, she condemned. Too many side effects for the most standard action. She shared the contacts of a specialist from the 30s. The atmosphere there was, of course, better. Parks, a port, developed infrastructure. This was the place where Renok was now. She hadn't even asked him anything back then. Their cards were hidden from each other for now. Once he got there, he put on his Van guise again, since Jenny had sent him to this place. The park in the 30th district looked like a real tropical jungle, an amazing place. However, Van didn't need flowers, but another incomprehensible door. The corridor he entered was nowhere near as bright and joyful. At the very end of it, a green light was glowing above the armored door. The smell was different from the first Viper. Greenish smoke was spreading across the floor. There was a man in black standing at the table. His phrase, "I'm from Jenny," didn't impress at all. He doesn't remember allowing her to send anyone to him. However, he was not rich enough to refuse clients. So what is the visitor looking for in his garden? The visitor was primarily interested in why the garden was located in a real botanical garden. Instead of answering, the old man picked up a flower and asked if Renoku knew what it was. This plant is called aeonium. It can increase physical performance and endurance. There are plenty of them here, that's why. Then Van put the Viper on the table, asking if he could buy something like that here. The old man unscrewed the filter and dropped some blue liquid onto his tongue. Then he immediately spat it out. He didn't like the contents. But this cheap thing helped Renok replenish his mana. When it turned out that he was a magician, the old man said that then such a Viper would definitely not suit him. Too low-grade and cheap. He continued to talk about whether a young mage could have a high level and whether he needed such devices. But Renok was not really listening. He had already realized that he simply needed a better product. The player wanted the best he could get for 2 million cell. Meanwhile, Jenny in her bar couldn't stop thinking about Van and his magic. Even Dylan could tell electricity from ice, couldn't he? Besides, Van was very quick to grasp what was going on. Strong and smart, where did he come from? The bartender advised him not to rush and just give him a job. If he agreed to work with companies after the incident at the factory, mercenaries and bandits will certainly snatch him up, but is the game worth the candle? Van also received his suitcase with vipers, which could stimulate the body for 6 hours, increasing magical power and endurance. Side effects included vomiting, coughing up blood, headaches. Isn't that a bit much for that kind of money? However, it was the best option possible. It was possible to reduce the side effects, but it would have cost more. Although this Viper was also good, the new model was activated not by a button, but by mana. As soon as Rinok compared the product with another brand, the old man became furious. How dare he compare a high-quality Viper with that pile of chemicals? Without really listening to him, Wang closed the suitcase and left. The merchant, who had suddenly changed his mood, waved goodbye and asked him to come again. There was a man in the city who was in despair, and that man was Dry Krimgar, the head of the Krimgar Guild. 2 recently hired mages had quit just the other day, and they were so needed. One of the mercenaries, Wayne, said he should have been kinder. Dry shouted angrily that he hadn't demanded anything special from them. The team seemed to not care. They were clearly used to this. Having calmed down, Krimgar turned to the mercenary Kitty. Would she be able to bring new magicians? Then the phone rang. It was Jenny, asking if they needed a mage. He may have been alone, but he was worth many, and he was completely different. Renok, having received a large sum, moved from the hotel to a rented apartment. He cast a protective spell that would pierce any uninvited guest with lightning. The first stage was completed. There was no such need at the hotel, but now he can probably say that he is at home and security is needed here. Then Van received a call from Jenny offering him a job. It was still convenient to have a mobile phone. He could even check the Balkan news. They also wrote about the company he blew up the other day. They presented it all as a gas leak. Although the task was completed successfully, he met Kroken and realized that no matter how strong he was, he could not yet cope with such a strong opponent. He risked not surviving the next meeting. Renok's gaze fell on the package lying on the bed. It was time to begin the second stage. At the bar, Jenny was talking about a new order. They needed to capture a building. They were mercenaries. Although Wang thought he would go on a mission with mercenaries again, the company's building was seized, and management feared that information about transactions would be lost. Van was simply required to attack the enemy from behind. Of course, there were other orders. Anyone who survived the battle with Kroken could not help but become popular. But Jenny still advised going to Krimgar. They worked for money and did not have the habit of deceiving mercenaries. Van agreed. The next morning, they would be waiting for him in the 53rd district. And they were really waiting for him. Everyone was gathered, only Renok had not yet appeared. Well, an excellent opportunity to discuss him. But when the actual mage showed up, the team was impressed. Negatively, though, Van didn't look impressive at all. And they're going to pay 20 million for this? There's no way Jenny recommended this boy. Even though some people were not happy with his breakfast, Renok was ready to provide all possible fire support. It was time to discuss the plan one last time. The end goal was to normalize the operation of the power plant server on the 3rd floor. They were supposed to split into 3 teams and deal with the gang of cleaners, as they called themselves, at different levels, and then unite. The Krimgar Guild prepared their weapons and quickly dispersed throughout the area. In this world, the presence of such a diverse and powerful weapon, available to many, was no longer surprising. On the side, Dry warned the master magician that the opponents might also have hired a magician. Listening to him, Wang himself had already felt the golden thread of the search spell in the air. Indeed, some person tried to determine how many people appeared on the territory and where they were. Renok confidently grabbed hold of this magical wire. His own mana flowed in the opposite direction along the laid channels. The enemy mage realized what was happening too late. The energy that was sent back turned against its owner, killing him. The cleaners didn't even understand why he fell down dead. The mage was killed, which meant they were effectively discovered. If they were to attack, they would attack now. Dry trusted Renok's words and waved his hand at the mercenaries. A smoke bomb flew ahead of them. The enemies were immediately thrown off balance, but they were ready to kill. Meanwhile, Van calmly used the Viper, knowing that he would need a lot of mana. Maximum fire support was needed from the very beginning. The cleaners were immediately struck by blue lightning as they cleared the first echelon. Now the guild understands why this guy is charging so much money. The cleaners' formation was broken and they could boldly go on the attack. It wasn't even necessary to shoot. Many chose close combat. There was a shooter on the floor above who was not struck by lightning. He posed a greater threat. But, fortunately, not for long. Kitty was no worse a shooter. She noticed reinforcements in her sights. As soon as Kitty shouted, "Shields!" two mercenaries immediately seemed to descend from above, covering the captain. And on the count of 3, the shields flew forward, turning from defense to attack. Their collision created a small explosion, destroying several opponents at once. The reinforcements were furious. The crowd rushed into a new fight. Of course, no one was very impressed. However, the man in the center was different from the others. His target was the magician. Since Wang didn't expect to be assigned a personal assassin, he didn't expect a knife flying towards his throat. But he had a gun, which quickly dealt with the problem. Moreover, the shot was accompanied by magic. Not a bad revolver, it withstood 3 attack spells. Dry realized that the mage would take care of himself. But the speed and dexterity with which he drew his weapon was astonishing. The value of this employee grew steadily. So the entrance was clear. It was time to attack. The fighters secured the harpoons and climbed up to the floor above. Leaning on the shoulders of those below them, some of the guild members climbed another third. Once the building was entered, rivers of blood began to flow again. And fortunately, the blood belonged to the cleaners. Reinok followed Dry and finished off those who somehow survived the first blows. Kitty, who was on the second floor, answered the call on the radio, but her situation was clearly worse. The radio went silent for a second. But then the girl reported that the second floor was clear. Then you could climb the stairs, killing those who guarded it. Van, of course, was a huge help, taking out half the survivors with one casual attack. Krimgar looked at him, increasingly realizing that this man's potential was enormous. Kitty wasn't blind either, and even offered to lure him to their guild. However, Krimgar refused. They don't have the money for it. Refusing to discuss the matter further, Dry radioed the squad that had gone to the roof. But instead of an answer, he received only a deafening noise. Wayne could only wheeze something incoherently, scaring the others to death. The guild rushed up, and Reinok fell behind a little, promising to catch up with them in a couple of minutes. In fact, he was simply on his last legs. His body was not giving in. At the top, the guild was met by many half-dead comrades scattered throughout the plateau. Drain rushed towards Wayne, hoping that he was still breathing. Having found this to be the case, he sent the others to get the elixir of restoration. He's expensive, but a comrade's life is at stake. It turned out that everyone was seriously injured, but no one was dead. Reinok wondered why, with so many victims, no one was killed. After thinking about the situation, he voiced his guess out loud. Whoever had injured them was still here. Dry had to give orders, so he asked Van to take care of Wayne. Where is this man hiding? And he wasn't hiding. He was above them the whole time. The man who had crippled the guild sat on the tower and watched as people died. But the cleaners tried so hard to occupy this server and get information about taxes, the man from the tower complained. They were going to steal money from the city government, and they didn't even have to take over the city government building. Very unusual plans for a former military man. Krimgar saw very well that this man had left the front several years ago. Shock crossed his face as the man reached for a gun? A bomb? No, for some big red pill. He saw through her and jumped from the tower. Once on the ground, the soldier no longer looked like a human being. He was being shot at by dozens of people, but he didn't care. Reaching out to the nearest fighter, the monster tore the heart out of his chest. A shudder ran through the bodies of the mercenaries when the man reported that he had not killed anyone because he needed the energy of others to maintain his strength. It was black magic. Eats human flesh. He's probably a vampire. One heart was clearly not enough, and the enemy began to attack again. The fighters covered themselves with shields, but they were cut through as easily as butter. The vampire attacked the girl, baring his triangular teeth. He broke her neck, tasted the blood, and threw it on the ground. The monster found it tasteless. Everyone who was able to stand on their feet rushed to the attack. Even Dry could barely withstand the blows. But he too was thrown back. Kitty and the other snipers continued to fire, although it didn't seem to have much effect. As the vampire leapt at her, he was struck by Van's lightning. A second before, he could have felt the blow approaching, and if so, then his next target is Reinok. The vampire was going to remove him at any cost. A human using such spells is too dangerous. He concentrated a large amount of magical energy on the barrel of the gun, and when the bullets pierced the monster's body, a photo of blood burst from its mouth. But it was still necessary to finish off the enemy without wasting a second. A weak body will not forgive a mistake. Van grabbed the vampire by the jaw, not afraid of close combat. A bolt of lightning ran through his body, and the man bared his teeth with all his might, assuring that it would not affect him in any way. If he were a simple man, his head would have burst like a watermelon by now. But since there was Kroken in this world, such tricks would not surprise anyone. Van shot the vampire in the head, but he was able to stand up and rush towards the magician, causing everyone else to jump up. The guild members were still able to pin the weakened monster to the floor. Dry couldn't determine the vampire's condition or understand what was happening, so he turned to Van. He explained, "It was a matter of black magic. By feeding on human flesh, the enemy gained great powers, but as soon as they were no longer enough, he lost his mind. The psyche of such a magician is very unstable. Most likely, he will soon lose the ability to speak and block attacks. That's why he left those people alive." Previously, Wang had been unable to figure out his opponent's weak point, but now he knew what to do. It was necessary to draw mana out of him. It looked horrific, as if the vampire was decomposing alive. As a result, a clot of black energy ended up in Renuk's hand. All that's left is to finish it off. There shouldn't be any more problems with this. But what to do with the mana clot now? It is impossible to hold it for a long time. There is no special container. But this is a chance to learn more about black magic. All that was left was to dispel it. Wayne watched Renok's actions and was very impressed. Did he really see everything? Both the mana and how the mage controlled it? If the guy is not lying, then he may have innate magical abilities. He stood up and said that perhaps if he imitated Wang, he would be able to become at least a little stronger someday. It's not entirely clear what he wants, but Renok is clearly not the one who should teach him how to live. So he just said that Krimgar is a great leader, and he will give Vayne more. But if he does decide to do something, he should see Jenny. Dry thanked the player for his invaluable help. He responded by sympathizing with all the wounded and asked to send a sample of vampire blood to Jenny. Krimgar agreed, sent the money and even gave him a business card. He would be glad to cooperate. Wang promised to contact if there was such an opportunity. Dry Krimgar is a talented leader and businessman. It is worth keeping in touch with the group. Kitty kept insisting that he should be hired. He was an excellent magician, a real genius, but during the battle, Krimgar still did not have the money to pay such a talented employee. But if so, then where is the guarantee that he will not become their enemy the next time they meet? They can only hope. Returning to the bar after the mission, Rainek ran into Dylan. He happily called him a partner, and even got upset when Van reminded him that they were not partners. As soon as Dylan explained that he actually wanted a popular friend, Jenny's folder came down on his head in an instructive manner. She told me not to listen to this nonsense and to tell him how the mission went. And it went great. If only because Kroken was not on the horizon. Dylan was already back in action and said that while the leader of Pandemonium was inimitable, the cleaners weren't a weak gang either. But it was necessary to understand that a gang is one thing, and its leader is quite another. They are much more dangerous, especially those who live in the 20s. In any case, according to Jenny, there were plenty of people willing to hire Renok after the last mission. She gave him a whole folder with a bunch of job proposals, and she even gave him the vampire blood that he asked for. There were indeed a lot of offers, and Jenny put on the sweetest face she could, saying that she would like to work with him as long as possible. She immediately closed Dylan's mouth, who again wanted to insert something at the wrong time. The bartender suddenly treated Van to a drink on the house. Who would have thought that for him it would result in vomiting and feeling disgusting a couple of hours later? I had to give up alcohol so as not to increase the side effects of the Viper. Having come to his senses a little, Van remembered that Jenny had advised him not to delay and to choose quickly. There were indeed many offers, from a mercenary to a test subject. One of them came from the cleaners. Jenny must have added it on purpose. Having rejected offers from mercenaries, gangs, and private individuals, the Raynok was left with only 2 papers in his hands. Let it be a pharmaceutical company. He had just visited its website some time ago. They produced a unique Stimonia. It increased physical endurance, something that Renoku lacked. Yes, he will definitely take their task. Maybe he will get Stimonia, and maybe they can suggest him some remedy for insomnia. But instead of immediately starting the task, Wang decided to get better acquainted with the local magic. In particular, he was interested in shooting. One of the criminals wanted by the government felt this firsthand. A hole appeared in his knee from a magic bullet. So Renok came to the conclusion that these skills would be enough for him for now. But he still had to devote time to the unique auxiliary magic. So Van showed up at the bar only a few weeks later. Jenny seemed to know in advance that he would choose the pharmaceutical company. She was immediately distracted by a ringing bell. While the girl was speaking to the side, a distinguished man in a suit who clearly knew him approached Renoku. knew him as a hunter and a mercenary. And while it was flattering, Wong had no intention of being nice to strangers who hadn't even bothered to introduce themselves. Instead of answering, the man threw his business card at him. Or at him. But pieces of cardboard don't fly so smoothly and evenly. So this man has superpowers. Despite this, Wong easily intercepted the business card. The man introduced himself as Sebastian and said that he did roughly the same thing as Jenny. And then he smiled when Rennick said that he apparently also had telekinesis. Sebastian reached for the bottle of wine, quite pleased with the mage's conclusions. But Jenny, who had returned, snatched the bottle from him and ordered him to leave her visitor alone. It turned out that this man came not just like that, but on business. He brought news that some gatherings would take place much earlier than expected. Reinach read this news on the internet yesterday. Apparently, the problem was quite serious, but after reporting it, Sebastian got ready to leave. Finally, he extended his hand to Reinach and advised him to contact him if he wanted to try himself in a new business. And Wong did not refuse a handshake. Jenny didn't seem to even intend to interfere with this. If he wanted to leave, she wouldn't stop him. But they were not allowed to talk again. A new visitor appeared in the bar. It was a certain uptight man who came to Jenny. He and Reinach were escorted to a secret negotiating room. The man who came was a sales manager at Amnak, that same pharmaceutical company. He handed Van the assignment sheet, even though he had already read it. Amnak was a small pharmaceutical company developing neurostabilizers. She was expected to see a big increase in profits, but the district administration hired gangs to steal new developments. First of all, Renoku should have known that the medicine already existed and was about to be sent to the Intellectual Property Office, but someone notified the administration about it. The manager handed Van a card with a photo and the address where the medicine was located, which needed to be transferred to the department. However, Renock was not a fool and advised him to tell the whole truth at once. The manager couldn't hide the horror in his eyes at these words. Jenny also joined in the conversation. Where is the guarantee that Van will not encounter the aforementioned gangs? He didn't just have to deliver the sample undetected. He would have to use force. Here Jenny hinted that in light of the events that had come to light, it might be worth discussing the issue of payment. She handed over the phone and stood up to give the manager time to talk to the boss about it. She told Renoku that cheating at the very beginning did not bode well, but at least they would raise the pay now. Even if the administration hired a gang, it is unlikely to be a large and dangerous one, with the exception of the leader, of course. But she promised to get him another 10 million for this. Finally, a trembling manager emerged from the room with a telephone. Only after getting into the car did Renock find out that he would not be working alone. The company had no intention of sending him alone and hired a small gang to guard him. Van decided to put pressure on the manager, reminding him that he had already been deceived once. He clarified whether there were any other samples in the warehouse. It turned out that all the other drugs stored there were already patented. In addition, it turned out that they produce a pretty good sleeping pill. A group of 10 men was already waiting for them at the warehouse. The manager reached for his belt, but Renock advised him not to go out yet. One of the men leaned towards the window, asking if they were from Amnak. As soon as the manager nodded, he started punching the glass. The man was very unhappy. No one thought that such a small number of people would have to carry out such a task. Now the only hope left is Renoka. Taking a drag on his Viper, he ordered them to leave. As Wong left the car, the anger turned towards him. When they were hired, there was no talk of fighting the gang. Yes, even a fool can understand that running into a gang is not a good prospect, but still, Renock didn't have time to finish this thought. A fist flew into his face, and he had to dodge. The aggressor had to be calmed down with a lightning strike. Only then did the mercenaries realize that a magician would be with them, and this changed the situation completely. However, among those remaining, there was still an upstart, a red-haired guy who was clearly not impressed. A fire burst into flames in his hand. Not all mages are good people, and considering this guy is here, he's clearly been rejected by society. This man possessed pyrokinesis and good analytical skills. He wanted to get rid of such a pathetic assistant, so as not to let him become a burden. Renock calmly put his palm right up to the fiery fist. He allowed the barrier to dissipate for a moment, allowing the flames to engulf it entirely. The fire was filled with his energy and went back, burning the owner. In fact, not all people who possess pyrokinesis are not afraid of fire. The upstart burned and begged for mercy. Then Renock pulled his hand back, letting him roll across the ground, extinguishing the flames. He looked at the manager through the window and told him to get out and not interfere. So, he needs to send the drug to the department in a day and a half. The sample was stored exactly where the company indicated. All that remained was to deal with the gangs. When he went outside, he found out that there were only 15 of them. Having ordered the entrance to be blocked and the area to be controlled, he left. The outer wall was crumbling and looked quite fragile, although it seemed easy to climb over. Wang created a spell that causes small explosions in mines. Significant damage was combined with a small area of effect, but now it needed to be expanded. He cast the next similar spell on the wall. When Renok finished with this, that red-haired upstart approached him. He dropped to one knee, asking forgiveness for his arrogance. Although Van had no intention of taking revenge on him, he condescendingly patted the boy on the shoulder and said that he would give him the opportunity to compensate for the damage.